Cowboy confronted Apache near the river bend, and the choice Apache offered bent his destiny. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Johnny O'Connor had always been a solitary man. His ranch, tucked away near the river bend, was a place of silence, broken only by the rustling of trees and the occasional call of a bird. He lived alone, spent long hours in the fields, and rarely ventured into town. He had his reasons. The echoes of his past haunted him like a shadow, reminding him of the mistakes he had made and the lives he had touched, sometimes in ways he wished he hadn't. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the land, Johnny noticed something unusual. The wind had shifted, and with it, the scent of the earth seemed to change. A figure appeared in the distance, moving slowly, with purpose. At first, Johnny thought it was just another traveler passing through, but as the figure drew closer, he could see the distinctive attire, the war paint, the leather, and the feathers that marked this person as Apache. Johnny's heart skipped a beat. The Apache were a people he had heard of, but had never truly understood. He had grown up hearing stories of conflict between his people and the tribes, stories of violence, distrust, and loss. But this was different. This was a man, a warrior, who seemed to be walking straight toward him, not with hostility, but with calm determination. The man stopped just a few yards away from Johnny. His eyes, dark and steady, locked onto Johnny's. There was no aggression in his stance, no weapon drawn, just a quiet presence that seemed to fill the space between them. Johnny didn't move. He had been taught to be cautious, to never let his guard down in the presence of someone he didn't know. But there was something about this man, something that made Johnny hesitate. "You are O'Connor," the Apache said, his voice deep and measured. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Johnny's hand instinctively moved toward his belt, where his gun usually rested. But he didn't draw it. Instead, he nodded. "I am." "What do you want?" The Apache man's lips curled into a slight smile. "I come to offer you a choice," he said, taking a step closer, his feet barely making a sound on the earth. Johnny's eyes narrowed. He had been in enough confrontations to know that a choice wasn't always a gift. "A choice? What kind of choice?" Johnny asked, his voice low. The Apache man's smile faded, and his gaze turned serious. "I come from a tribe who has suffered much. The land we once called home is no longer ours. Our people are scattered, forced into submission. But there is a way for us to fight back. A way for us to reclaim what was lost." Johnny's mind raced. This was no ordinary conversation. The Apache man wasn't just talking about land, he was talking about something bigger, something that could change the course of history. "And what does this have to do with me?" Johnny asked, still unsure of where this was going. The Apache man stepped forward, his presence almost overwhelming. "You've seen the injustices that have been done. You've heard the stories of what happened to our people. You've seen it with your own eyes. You could help us." Johnny's heart pounded in his chest. He had seen the injustices, yes, but he had never thought of himself as someone who could change anything. He was just a man trying to survive in a world that didn't care for people like him. The Apache man paused, studying Johnny's face. "I am offering you a chance to make things right. To take a stand, to fight for what is just. The choice is yours, but know this, by making the choice, you will change your destiny forever." Johnny looked out over the river bend, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and red. This was a moment that would define everything. The choice was his to make, and whatever he decided would shape not only his future, but the future of those around him. In that quiet, tense moment, Johnny understood that this was no ordinary decision. It was the crossroads of his life, and he could feel it deep in his bones. He turned back to the Apache man. "What do I need to do?" he asked, his voice steady. The Apache man's eyes glinted with something that resembled hope. "You will follow me," he said, "and together, we will change everything." Johnny followed the Apache warrior, whose name was Tushunka, down a narrow path that led through the dense forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the sound of distant birds calling to one another. Johnny's mind raced as he tried to process everything that had just been offered to him. He had spent years alone, hiding from the world, running from his own past, and now, here he was, walking alongside an Apache warrior who had extended an invitation he couldn't ignore. Tushunka's steps were steady, confident, and despite the weight of the situation, Johnny felt a strange sense of calm in his presence. "Where are we going?" Johnny asked, his voice low but firm. "To my people," Tushunka replied, without looking back. "To the tribe that still believes in the old ways. The ones who fight for what is right." Johnny felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had heard stories, of course, stories about the Apache and their fierce resistance against settlers, but he had never expected to be part of something so monumental. He had always thought of himself as just a simple cowboy, a man who worked his land and stayed out of trouble. Now, it seemed, his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet understand. They walked for hours, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting a golden hue across the landscape. The journey was quiet, with only the sounds of their footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. Johnny's mind kept returning to Tushunka's words. "You will help us." But how could a man like him, just a rancher, possibly make a difference? He was no warrior. He didn't have the training or the skills to fight like these Apache. But as they reached a clearing near the base of a mountain, Tushunka stopped and turned to him. "You doubt yourself," Tushunka said, as if reading Johnny's thoughts. "But the path of the warrior is not always one of fighting. Sometimes it is a path of understanding, of making a choice that will shape your future." Johnny stood still, absorbing the weight of those words. He had always been a man of action, not words. But now, he was being asked to do something that required far more than just physical strength. He was being asked to make a decision, one that could alter the course of his life. "What do you want me to do?" Johnny asked, finally voicing the question that had been on his mind since he first agreed to follow Tushunka. The Apache warrior looked at him with a steady gaze, his expression unreadable. "You will help us find the men who have stolen from our people," Tushunka said. "You will stand with us when we fight for what is ours. And when the time comes, you will decide whether you are with us or against us." Johnny felt the weight of those words settle deep in his chest. This wasn't just a fight for land or resources. This was a fight for something far more important: honor, justice, and the very soul of a people who had been wronged for far too long. As the sun finally set, the last rays of light faded into the horizon, and Johnny knew that the decision he was about to make would forever change the course of his destiny. He wasn't just following Tushunka to the tribe. He was stepping into a new chapter of his life, one that would require him to choose between the man he had been and the man he was about to become. He looked at Tushunka, nodded, and took a deep breath. "I'll help," Johnny said, his voice steady and resolute. "I don't know what's ahead, but I'm ready to stand with you." Tushunka nodded in return, his eyes flickering with something that could have been approval, or perhaps something deeper, something more significant than mere gratitude. Together, they continued their journey through the darkening forest, the sound of their footsteps now joined by the distant calls of the night animals, as Johnny's path grew ever clearer. The journey took Johnny and Tushunka deeper into the heart of the wilderness. The terrain became more rugged, the air cooler as they climbed higher up the hills. Johnny's mind buzzed with questions, but he said little, not wanting to disturb the silence that surrounded them. The Apache warrior, ever watchful, led the way with ease, his movements sure and confident, as though he was one with the land. The further they traveled, the more Johnny felt the weight of the decision he had made. The path ahead was uncertain, and his past, a past full of mistakes, felt like it was closing in on him. The sun had dipped behind the mountains by the time they arrived at a small clearing, nestled between two towering cliffs. It was there that Tushunka stopped and turned to Johnny. "This is where we will rest," he said, his voice calm yet firm. Johnny nodded, grateful for the pause. As he set down his pack, he looked around the camp, noticing the faint glow of a distant fire. Tushunka gestured for Johnny to sit, and as he did, the warrior moved to the edge of the clearing and began to chant in his native tongue. Johnny couldn't understand the words, but the rhythm of the chant was soothing, almost hypnotic. It was as if the land itself was responding to the sound. Johnny leaned back against a tree, his eyes closed, his thoughts racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming, something that would change everything. He had already made the choice to help the Apache, but what if he wasn't enough? What if his presence only made things worse? As if sensing his inner turmoil, Tushunka turned and walked over to him, his expression unreadable. "You wonder if you are enough," he said, his voice steady. "But know this, it is not the strength of the body that makes a warrior. It is the strength of the heart." Johnny looked up at Tushunka, his words hitting him harder than he had expected. The warrior's eyes, deep and ancient, locked onto his. "You are stronger than you think, Johnny O'Connor," Tushunka continued. "The strength you need is already within you. You must learn to trust it." Johnny sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on the words. He had never thought of himself as strong. In his world, strength was measured by muscle, by skill with a gun, by the ability to survive in the wild. But now, faced with this new path, he realized that strength might mean something different, something more. As the night grew darker, Johnny and Tushunka sat together in silence. The fire crackled softly between them, casting flickering shadows on the ground. Tushunka's presence was calming, and Johnny found himself growing more at ease with each passing minute. He still didn't fully understand the depth of what was unfolding, but he knew one thing for certain: he was no longer the man he had been. When the fire had burned down to embers, Tushunka stood and extended a hand to Johnny. "We leave at dawn," he said. Johnny took the hand, feeling a sense of resolve settle in his chest. He was ready. The decision had been made. The journey ahead would be difficult, but he knew it was the only path worth taking. Together, they walked back into the night, leaving the past behind, and stepping into a future that, for the first time, seemed full of possibility. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Johnny and Tushunka were already on the move. The chill of the early morning air stung Johnny's face, but it also seemed to sharpen his senses, clearing away the fog of doubt that had clouded his mind the night before. Tushunka walked in front of him, his steps deliberate, his presence steady. Johnny's thoughts kept returning to the words the Apache warrior had shared: strength wasn't just about physical power, it was about the heart. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he could feel it. This was more than just a fight. This was about something deeper, something that would challenge everything Johnny had believed about himself. They traveled in silence for hours, the path winding through dense forests and rocky ridgelines. The sound of their boots crunching on the earth was the only noise, save for the occasional call of a bird overhead. Johnny's muscles were sore from the long journey, but he pushed on, determined not to show any sign of weakness. Every step brought him closer to something unknown, but he felt a strange pull, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. As the sun climbed higher, they reached the top of a hill that overlooked a vast valley below. Johnny paused, taking in the view. The land stretched out before him, a tapestry of wild beauty. He had seen this land before, but today it felt different, more meaningful. Tushunka stopped beside him, his gaze scanning the valley below. "This is where it begins," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. Johnny looked at the warrior, confusion still in his eyes. "Where what begins?" he asked, unsure of what Tushunka meant. "The fight," Tushunka replied simply. "But it is not just a fight with weapons. It is a fight for our land, our people, and for what is right." Johnny felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had never been a fighter. He had never thought of himself as someone who could lead or stand up against the odds. But now, with Tushunka standing beside him, the weight of the decision he had made began to settle in. He was here, and there was no turning back. "We must go to the camp," Tushunka continued. There you will meet the elders. They will decide if you are truly ready to join us. Johnny nodded, though his heart was pounding in his chest. He didn't know what he was about to face, but he was ready to find out. They made their way down the hill and through the valley, following a narrow trail that led them to a small clearing. As they entered the clearing, Johnny saw a group of Apache gathered around a fire. There were men, women, and children, all watching them with quiet intensity. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and earth. Tushunka approached the group, and Johnny followed closely behind. The people didn't speak, but their eyes followed him, sizing him up, measuring him in ways that Johnny couldn't understand. At the center of the group was an older man, his face lined with age and wisdom. His eyes were sharp yet calm. Tushunka, the elder said, his voice deep and strong. Who is this man you bring before us? Tushunka stepped forward and placed a hand on Johnny's shoulder. This is Johnny O'Connor, he said. He has come to stand with us. The elder studied Johnny for a long moment, his gaze piercing. Johnny felt exposed, as if the elder could see right through him, into his soul. After what felt like an eternity, the elder spoke again. And what does he seek? Johnny swallowed, his throat dry. He had no idea what to say. He had never been good with words, especially not when it came to matters of the heart. But then he remembered Tushunka's words. I seek to make things right, Johnny said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of his confession. The elder nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Then you have already begun the journey, he said. Johnny didn't know what to expect next, but he could feel the shift in the air around him. He was no longer just a man running from his past. He was someone on a mission that would shape the rest of his life. The elder gestured for Johnny to sit by the fire, and as Johnny took his place among the Apache, he realized that his destiny was no longer in his hands alone. The path he had chosen had already begun to unfold, and it was leading him towards something greater than himself. The journey ahead would be long, and the choices would be difficult, but for the first time in years, Johnny felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Johnny sat by the fire, feeling the warmth spread through him as the night air cooled around them. The people of the Apache tribe were quiet, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Johnny could feel the weight of their eyes on him, studying him, but no one spoke. The elder, still seated across from him, seemed to be waiting for something. Johnny didn't know what to expect, but he felt the tension building around him. Finally, the elder spoke, his voice calm yet commanding. You have come to us seeking redemption, he said. But redemption is not something easily earned. It is a path you must walk with honor and courage. Johnny nodded, his hands resting on his knees. I understand, he said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. The elder studied him for a moment, then gestured for Johnny to rise. There is much you must learn, he said. Our ways are different from yours, but they are no less powerful. You must learn to listen to the land, to the wind, to the spirits that guide us. Only then will you understand what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. Johnny stood slowly, the weight of the elder's words settling deep in his chest. He had spent so long running from his past, from the mistakes that had defined him, but now he felt as if he was being given a chance to start anew. He didn't know how to listen to the land or the spirits, but he was willing to learn. What must I do? He asked. The elder smiled slightly, as though he had been waiting for the question. Come with me, he said, rising from his seat. The elder led Johnny through the camp, past the quiet tents of the tribe, until they reached a small clearing at the edge of the forest. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone, covered in intricate carvings. Johnny felt an odd sense of reverence as he approached it, though he didn't know why. This is the stone of the ancestors, the elder explained. It is where we come to seek guidance, to make our choices. You will stand here, and you will ask the spirits for their wisdom. Johnny felt a twinge of uncertainty. He had never believed in such things. But he had come this far, and something inside him told him that he needed to try. He stepped forward and placed his hands on the stone, feeling the cool surface against his skin. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, everything seemed to grow still. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "What should I do?" he whispered. The wind picked up again, swirling around him, but there was no voice, no clear answer. Johnny opened his eyes, confused, but the elder was standing behind him, watching quietly. "The spirits do not speak to us in words," the elder said softly. "They speak to us through feelings, through the land, through the things we see and hear. You must learn to trust your instincts, to listen to the signs around you." Johnny nodded slowly, his mind still racing. He didn't know if he believed in spirits or signs, but he had no choice but to try. The elder placed a hand on Johnny's shoulder. "Your journey is just beginning," he said. "There will be many challenges ahead, but you must remain true to your heart. The path of a warrior is not always clear, but it is always guided by honor." Johnny looked at the elder, a sense of resolve settling over him. He had come here seeking redemption, and while he didn't know what lay ahead, he knew that he was no longer the man he had been. He was ready to learn, to listen, and to stand for something greater than himself. "I'm ready," Johnny said quietly. The elder nodded, and together they turned and walked back to the camp. The night felt different now, as though the weight of the world had shifted, and Johnny was no longer alone in his journey. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it, step by step, with honor and courage. Johnny woke up to the soft sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves and distant calls of animals marking the start of a new day. The fire had burned down to embers during the night, but the warmth still lingered in the air. The Apache camp was waking up around him, the smell of food and the faint murmur of voices filling the cool morning air. He sat up, stretching his stiff muscles, and glanced over at Tushunka, who was already up and preparing for the day. The warrior moved with the same calm precision that Johnny had come to expect from him, his every action deliberate and purposeful. Johnny stood up, brushing off the dirt from his clothes, and walked over to the fire. As he warmed his hands, he noticed the elder from the night before watching him from across the camp. The elder's eyes were sharp, full of wisdom and understanding, as though he knew exactly what Johnny was thinking. Johnny had learned much in the short time he had been with the Apache, but there was still so much more to understand. Tushunka approached him, his expression unreadable. "Today, you will meet with the council," he said, his voice steady. "They will test your resolve, your commitment to our cause." Johnny felt a twinge of unease. The council was made up of the tribe's most respected leaders, and their judgment was final. He had no idea what to expect, but he was ready to face whatever challenge lay ahead. "What will they ask of me?" Johnny asked, his voice low. Tushunka looked at him for a long moment before answering. "They will ask you to prove that you are worthy of standing with us. They will ask you to show that you are not just a man seeking redemption, but a man ready to fight for what is right." Johnny nodded, his resolve hardening. He had come here seeking redemption, but now he realized it was more than that. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing up for something bigger than himself. The council would test his character, his heart, and his willingness to fight for justice. The journey ahead would not be easy, but he knew he had to see it through. As Tushunka led him toward the gathering place, Johnny's heart began to race. The council's fire was larger than the others, a ring of stones set up around it. Several figures were already sitting around the fire, their faces calm and unreadable. The air was thick with anticipation. Johnny approached the fire with Tushunka by his side, and the council members turned to face him. The elder who had spoken to him last night was among them, his eyes still as sharp as ever. "Johnny O'Connor," the elder said, his voice ringing with authority. "You have come to us seeking redemption, but the path you choose now is not an easy one. You must prove your worthiness, not just in words but in action. Will you stand with us, fight for what is right, and face the challenges ahead?" Johnny took a deep breath, his heart steady. "I will," he said firmly. The elder nodded, as if satisfied with his answer. "Then you shall be tested," he said. One of the council members stood and walked over to Johnny. "The test will be simple," the man said. You must face the trials of the land. The path you will walk is difficult, and it will test your strength, your courage, and your ability to make difficult choices. Are you ready to prove yourself? Johnny nodded, his eyes locked on the council member. I am ready, he said. The council member smiled slightly. Then go. The land will guide you. Johnny turned to Tushunka, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. With a final glance at the council, Johnny stepped forward, his heart racing with anticipation. The path ahead would be hard, but for the first time in his life, Johnny felt that he was on the right path. He wasn't just fighting for redemption anymore. He was fighting for something far greater, justice for those who had been wronged, for the Apache who had lost so much. As he moved deeper into the wilderness, Johnny knew that this was just the beginning of his journey. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it, no matter what came his way. Johnny walked deeper into the wilderness, following the path laid out before him. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, the sounds of the forest alive around him. The quiet was both unsettling and comforting at the same time. He had faced many challenges in his life, but nothing quite like this. The council had given him his task, and now it was up to him to prove himself. The trial of the land was more than just a test of his physical strength, it was a test of his character, of his ability to trust in himself and in the world around him. He knew the journey ahead would be difficult, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was exactly what he needed. As he moved forward, his thoughts wandered to the people he had left behind, the life he had once known, the man he had been. He had been a cowboy, a man of solitude and hard work, but now he felt like a different person. The weight of the past still hung heavy on his shoulders, but it was no longer the burden it once was. He had made a choice, and that choice was leading him down a path he had never imagined. Johnny's mind shifted back to the present as he reached a clearing in the woods. In the center of the clearing stood a large rock, worn smooth by the elements. It was the kind of rock that looked ancient, like it had been here long before he arrived. Johnny approached it cautiously, feeling a strange pull toward it. He had no idea what the rock meant, but he knew it was important. As he touched the surface, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, rustling the trees around him. Johnny stood still, feeling the wind against his face, and for a moment, he felt connected to something greater than himself. He closed his eyes, letting the breeze wash over him. He didn't know what he was supposed to do, but the feeling in his chest told him that this was part of the test. The answer wasn't something he could force, it had to come from within. He stepped back from the rock, his mind racing. There was something here, something hidden in the land, but he couldn't quite grasp it. The wind picked up again, and Johnny felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't supposed to understand everything right away. This was a journey, and each step was part of the process. The trials were meant to teach him, not just about the world around him, but about himself. As the day wore on, Johnny continued his journey, each step bringing him closer to the next part of the trial. The forest seemed to shift as he moved through it, the trees growing taller, and the path more difficult to follow. It was as if the land itself was testing him, pushing him to dig deeper within himself. His body was tired, and his mind was full of questions, but he pushed on. He didn't know what he would find at the end of this journey, but he knew that it would change him. And that was enough. By the time the sun began to set, Johnny found himself standing at the edge of a small stream. The water was clear, flowing gently over the rocks. He knelt beside it, his hands brushing the cool surface. For the first time in a long while, Johnny felt at peace. The trial wasn't over, but he had made it this far. He had faced the land, faced himself, and he had come through stronger. As the night began to settle in, Johnny sat by the stream, staring into the water, lost in thought. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but he felt ready. He had chosen this path, and no matter what came next, he would walk it with honor. Tomorrow, he would continue. But for now, he rested, knowing that each step he had taken had brought him closer to understanding what it truly meant to fight for what was right. Johnny awoke early the next morning, the cool mist of dawn clinging to his skin as he stood by the stream. The stars had faded, and the first light of the sun painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges. His muscles ached from the journey, but there was a sense of strength within him now that had not been there before. The land, the trial, the people he had met, it all seemed to be leading him to this moment. Today would be the final test, the one that would determine if he truly belonged with the Apache. He had walked for miles, faced the elements, and fought his own doubts, but now, standing at the edge of the stream, he felt a quiet certainty that he was ready. The sound of footsteps broke his concentration. He turned to see Tushunka approaching, his steps steady and silent, as always. "The council waits for you," Tushunka said. His voice was calm, yet Johnny could sense the weight of his words. The final trial was at hand. Johnny nodded, standing tall. "I'm ready," he replied, though a small knot of uncertainty tugged at his chest. The two of them walked in silence, the path before them clearer now, as though the earth itself was guiding their way. The trees thinned as they neared the edge of the forest, and the camp came into view. The council fire still burned, its smoke rising into the early morning sky. As they approached the circle, Johnny saw the elders waiting, their expressions unreadable but expectant. The air was thick with tension, and Johnny's heart beat faster. This was it. His every choice, his every action, had brought him here. Now he had to prove himself. Tushunka stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on Johnny's shoulder. "The trial is not just of strength," he said, his voice low and firm. "It is of the spirit. The land has already tested you, and now it is time to see if you can stand with us." Johnny nodded, feeling the weight of Tushunka's words settle in his chest. He had spent so long running from the past, but now it was time to stand firm. Time to face the future, whatever it held. The elder who had spoken to him before motioned for Johnny to step forward. The others watched silently as Johnny approached the fire. He could feel their eyes on him, weighing him, judging him. But he didn't flinch. He had nothing to hide. "Johnny O'Connor," the elder said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "You have walked with us, you have learned our ways, and you have come to us seeking a place among us. But a place is not given. It must be earned." Johnny looked up, meeting the elder's gaze. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I am ready." The elder studied him for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You have chosen the path of honor," the elder said. "But the final step is yours to take. Will you fight for us, stand with us when the time comes? Will you be one of us?" Johnny felt a surge of something deep within him. This was the moment. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment he could prove that he was no longer the man who had run away from his past. He was the man who was ready to stand for something greater. "I will," Johnny said, his voice ringing out with certainty. The elder smiled, a rare flicker of warmth in his eyes. "Then you are one of us," he said. "Welcome, Johnny O'Connor, to the Apache people." A wave of relief and pride washed over Johnny. He had done it. He had earned his place, not through strength or violence, but through honor and commitment. As the council members stood and the tribe gathered around him, Johnny realized that he had finally found the place where he belonged. The journey ahead would still be difficult, and the challenges would continue, but Johnny knew he was ready. He had made his choice. He would fight for what was right, for the people who had accepted him, and for the land that had given him a new purpose. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its warm light over the camp as the Apache tribe gathered in unity. Johnny stood among them, his heart full, knowing that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Johnny stood with the Apache, feeling the weight of his new life settle in. The elders had spoken, and he had made his choice. He had joined the tribe, not as a stranger, but as one of them. It was a feeling he had never experienced before, the sense of belonging to something greater than himself. The fire had burned down to embers, and the camp was quiet, the stars above shining down like a promise. Johnny had learned much during his time with the Apache, but there was still more to understand, more to prove. The path ahead was not without its challenges. The elder who had welcomed him into the tribe stood by his side, his presence a steady reminder of the responsibility Johnny now carried. "You have made your choice, Johnny O'Connor," the elder said, his voice deep and resonant. "But the journey is never truly finished. There will always be trials, always more to learn. You must continue to walk the path of honor, and in doing so, you will earn your place among us." Johnny nodded, his heart swelling with determination. He had made mistakes in the past, but this was his chance to make things right. The Apache had shown him the meaning of true strength, not in weapons, but in character. It was a lesson he would carry with him every day. As the days passed, Johnny spent his time learning from the Apache, participating in their rituals, and earning the trust of those around him. The land, the people, and the customs were all so different from what he had known, but they felt right. He had never felt more alive, more connected to the world around him. One afternoon, as Johnny and Tushunka walked along the river, the warrior spoke of the future. "Our people have always fought for what is right," Tushunka said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "But the world is changing. The days of the old ways are fading, and we must adapt if we are to survive." Johnny listened, feeling the weight of Tushunka's words. He had seen how the world outside the Apache's way of life was changing. The settlers, the soldiers, all pushing further into the land. He had once been part of that world, but now, he stood on the other side. "What do we do?" Johnny asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Tushunka turned to face him, a glint of determination in his eyes. "We fight, but we fight for what is ours. For our people, for the land, and for our future." Johnny understood now. This was not just about surviving, it was about preserving something sacred. The Apache had fought for generations to protect their way of life, and now, Johnny was part of that fight. He had found his purpose, and it was not just about redemption for himself, but for the Apache people as well. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light across the river, Johnny felt a sense of peace. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in his life, he felt ready to face whatever came his way. He was no longer the man who had run from his past. He was a man with a future, with a purpose. And with that, he turned and walked beside Tushunka, ready to take the next step in the path that had been set before him. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, with honor, with courage, and with the strength of the Apache behind them.